Snow pressed against the tall windows of the Averley Winter Gala as though the night itself wished to peer in upon the company gathered beneath the golden chandeliers. Eleanor Whitcomb stood near the edge of the ballroom, her gloved hands folded tightly before her, hoping the trembling in her fingers might be disguised as ladylike stillness. She had come because her aunt insisted it might lift her spirits, but every step inside the glittering hall had felt like a trespass. Her gown, though clean and carefully mended, carried the quiet admission of reduced fortune, and every whisper that drifted along the polished floor seemed to brush her cheeks with cold suspicion. Eleanor had hoped the evening might pass with gentle indifference, yet the very air bristled with scrutiny. A pair of ladies in rose-colored silk regarded her with the kind of pity that disguised deeper pleasure. They had heard, no doubt, that her parents had died leaving debts rather than dowries, and that her aunt, though willing to offer a roof, had offered little warmth. But it was not poverty alone that stirred the speculative glances. A rumor, faint but growing, had emerged earlier that week, one claiming that Eleanor had entangled herself in a clandestine meeting with a gentleman of dubious character. She knew nothing of its origin, but falsehoods, once released, flew faster than truth. She attempted to ignore the weight of those stays, telling herself the night was nothing more than an unpleasant obligation. Yet humiliation arrived not as a whisper, but as a sudden hush that rippled across the ballroom. Her cousin, Charlotte Hawthorne, swept forward in shimmering sapphire, her smile an elegant blade. "My dear Eleanor," she said with lacquered sweetness, "I fear you have caused quite the disturbance." Gasps fluttered like startled birds. A footman, directed by someone of authority, politely requested that Eleanor step aside from the dance floor, for her presence had invited discomfort among the guests. The words cut more sharply for their measured politeness, and for the silent agreement she sensed around her. Eleanor's throat tightened, though she managed a composed nod. She had endured enough slights in recent months to know that open protest only fueled gossip. Still, the humiliation burned through her composure as she stepped back from the polished floor, her chest rising with breath she struggled to steady. Beyond the sea of faces, a single figure atop the grand staircase caught her eye. Duke Sebastian Ravensleigh stood as though carved from the cool marble behind him, observing the scene with an unreadable expression. His dark attire contrasted with the candle-lit brilliance around him. His gaze lingered not with disdain, but with something far more complex, something like regret. For a moment, a fragile thread of hope flickered through her, but the moment dissolved as swiftly as it appeared. The Duke did not move, did not intervene, did not even shift his weight as Charlotte offered a dramatic sigh and declared that the gala must retain its refinement. Eleanor felt the gaze from the staircase darken with a hesitation she could not decipher. Instead of stepping forward, he remained distant, a silent monarch presiding over an injustice he seemed unwilling or unable to halt. The orchestra resumed its music, lively and indifferent, as couples spun across the floor in bright circles that mocked her stillness. She sensed that if she stayed even a breath longer, the tears threatening to rise would betray her entirely. And so, with quiet dignity, she turned toward the exit. The corridor beyond the ballroom felt colder, as though the walls themselves recoiled from hosting one so publicly cast aside. Footmen glanced at her with polite detachment, neither offering assistance nor impeding her path. Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself against the ache that pulsed with each step. She had thought grief for her parents was the harshest sorrow she would endure, but tonight proved otherwise. Grief was private, humiliation was a spectacle. As she descended the final steps toward the entrance hall, she sensed someone approaching behind her. For a brief heartbeat, she imagined the Duke would follow, perhaps to offer a word, any word, that might restore a fragment of her dignity. But the footsteps belonged only to a servant carrying discarded garlands, who slipped past her without a glance. Outside, the night embraced her with a severity the ballroom had disguised. Snowflakes drifted in slow spirals beneath the gas lamps, settling upon her shoulders like pale judgments. The carriage her aunt had promised was nowhere in sight. Perhaps the woman had departed early, unwilling to wait for a niece who had become a liability. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter and considered walking the long road home. The cold crept into her bones, yet its sting felt almost welcome, honest, unlike the practiced smile she had endured for hours. She wondered if she possessed the strength to withstand what awaited her beyond this night. The rumor would spread further now. Society would not forget that she had been dismissed before the eyes of half the county. Her reputation lay shattered, fragile as frost beneath carriage wheels. She stepped toward the iron gate, intending to brave the long walk, when the faint creak of the ballroom doors reached her. She paused, breath suspended in the cold air. Footsteps followed, measured, deliberate, echoing with authority. Eleanor dared not hope again, yet her heart betrayed her, lifting despite everything. The Duke emerged into the wash of lamplight, his cloak trailing darkly behind him. For a fleeting instant, his eyes found hers across the whitened path. Something unspoken passed between them, an apology, a recognition, perhaps even the beginnings of courage. But then he hesitated. His gaze shifted back toward the ballroom, as if the weight of expectation pulled him in two opposing directions. Snowflakes collected in his hair like faint ashes of indecision. Without a word, he turned away, retreating into the shadows. Eleanor felt her hope extinguish, small and final. Yet something in his retreat forewarned of coming consequence. Whispers followed Eleanor Whitcomb through every street, shop, and idle gathering in Averley, trailing her with the slow, mournful persistence of a funeral bell. In the days after the gala, her name drifted through parlors as an omen of impropriety, uttered with the delicate horror reserved for moral catastrophes. At Penbury's bookshop, where she worked to ease her aunt's financial strain, Eleanor tried to lose herself among the orderly shelves, but even the scent of old paper could not silence the murmurs. Customers lingered too long near the counter, feigning interest in travelogues while studying her with narrowed eyes, as though the scandal might be visible upon her skin. She performed her duties with a composure that cost her dearly, her smile a fragile veil stretched thin over bruised dignity. Her aunt, Mrs. Hawthorne, took every measure to distance herself from the disgrace. Breakfast became an exercise in clipped instructions and thinly veiled rebukes, each one reminding Eleanor of a precarious position within the household. A single misstep can destroy a family, her aunt declared, never acknowledging that the misstep had not been Eleanor's. Newspapers were whisked away before she entered the room. Though the effort was pointless, the town's gossip column rendered secrecy impossible. Eleanor heard enough in the hushed tones of servants to know her reputation had been reshaped into a cautionary tale. Across town, Duke Sebastian Ravensley wrestled with his guilt in the solitude of his estate. His days unfolded in rigid order, meetings with land stewards, oversight of accounts, correspondence with Parliament. But each task dissolved beneath the weight of the memory haunting him. Eleanor standing alone under the glittering chandeliers, humiliated while he remained frozen at the top of the grand staircase. He told himself that intervention would have worsened matters, but the excuse rang hollow. It was not strategy that had held him back. It was fear, the same fear that had guided too many of his choices since his father's passing. Eleanor's quiet dignity at the gala had unsettled him more profoundly than any political obligation. Determined to understand the origins of the rumor that destroyed her evening, Sebastian made discreet inquiries. A footman recalled overhearing Charlotte Hawthorne speaking sharply to a friend moments before the scandal erupted. A coachman remembered delivering her early that night, her expression alight with calculated purpose. Servants across 3 estates repeated fragments of conversation, all pointing toward a single conclusion. The rumor had been planted, deliberate and cruel. Sebastian felt both clarity and fury settle upon him. Yet he kept his findings private, knowing that airing them prematurely would only further imperil Eleanor. His remorse compelled him toward a gesture he hoped might offer her even the smallest measure of comfort. Late one evening he wrote a letter, only a few lines, carefully chosen, and sealed within the envelope a winter rose pressed long ago by his mother. It was a token steeped in reverence, one he had never intended to part with, yet it felt unmistakably hers. He instructed his messenger to deliver it quietly, with no ceremony. But chance intervened. Mrs. Hawthorne intercepted the letter, declared it dangerously suggestive, and confiscated it under the guise of propriety. Eleanor discovered the discarded envelope hours later in the drawing room, torn and empty, its contents lost, or so she believed. The obstruction pained her more deeply than she anticipated. She had sensed sincerity in the gesture even without seeing its full form. Still, the very effort of sending the letter stirred a new wave of scandal. Two ladies recognized the Ravensleigh crest on the messenger's satchel, and by nightfall, the county buzzed with exaggerated interpretations. Some insisted Eleanor had written to the Duke first, begging for his favor. Others claimed he harbored a secret infatuation and sought her out recklessly. Each version grew more elaborate, until her name became a delicacy passed from tongue to tongue. Eleanor moved through town with her chin lifted, but her heart ached beneath the strain of Fawcett. It was on the fourth afternoon that the Duke crossed the threshold of Penbury's bookshop. The bell chimed softly, yet the sound struck Eleanor like a thunderclap. He approached with the bearing of a man intent on redemption, though his expression remained composed. She greeted him with a curtsy that nearly concealed her trembling. He inquired about a local history volume, transparent in its pretense, yet she appreciated the courtesy. Their conversation lasted scarcely a minute, but the air between them thrummed with unspoken remorse and fragile understanding. When he turned to leave, their eyes met briefly, and for the first time since the gala, Eleanor felt seen rather than scrutinized. Unfortunately, they had not been alone. Mrs. Penbury's niece, sharp-eyed and eager for entertainment, observed the interaction from behind a shelf. By evening she had recounted the moment to half the town, embellishing it with vivid invention. In her telling, Eleanor engineered the encounter, summoning the Duke through secret notes and tearful pleas. Mrs. Hawthorne confronted Eleanor as though she had orchestrated a national disgrace. "You have embarrassed this household beyond repair," she hissed, refusing to listen to Eleanor's quiet insistence that no such schemes existed. The scandal swelled until the county newspaper printed a cruel paragraph implying Eleanor sought to ensnare a man far above her station. Though unnamed, the Duke was unmistakably the subject. Eleanor read the article with steady eyes, but the words carved into her like chisels. She realized the truth with painful clarity. Her reputation was no longer merely damaged. It was owned by others, shaped by their delight in her downfall. That night, weary beyond her years, she resolved to withdraw from Sebastian entirely. Whatever kindness he felt, it could not outweigh the damage his proximity wrought. She would avoid him, silence every rumor by refusing to be part of the tale they insisted on telling. Yet as she prepared for bed, a faint thud echoed behind her. She turned to find a winter rose, preserved, perfect, lying near the door, as though returned by unseen hands. She lifted it with trembling fingers, her breath catching. Someone had placed it there deliberately. Someone who wished her to know she had not been forgotten. Rain swept across the city in long, silvery strokes, turning cobblestones into mirrors that caught fragments of lamplight. Eleanor walked briskly beneath her small umbrella, her steps quickened by the letter folded tightly in her glove. The handwriting inside, controlled, unmistakably aristocratic, had invited her to a private meeting at the Ravensleigh Conservatory. No apology, no flattery, merely an urgent request. There is a matter of truth that can no longer bear silence. The words unsettled her, yet she felt compelled by a need deeper than caution. She entered through the garden gate as instructed, her breath clouding in the cold air. The conservatory rose before her, its glass panes aglow from the soft illumination within. Rain whispered against the structure like 1,000 secrets. For a moment she hesitated, wondering whether her presence here would ignite fresh scandal. Yet turning back meant surrendering to a narrative others had written for her. She pushed open the door. Warmth enveloped her instantly, mingling with the scent of damp soil and the faint sweetness of night-blooming jasmine. Lanterns hung from iron hooks, their light casting soft patterns across the leaves. Sebastian Ravensleigh stood at the far end, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed upon her with an intensity that stole her breath. He inclined his head, formal yet fraught with emotion. "Miss Whitcomb, thank you for coming despite everything." She removed her gloves with careful composure. "Your letters suggested necessity, Your Grace. I would not have come otherwise." Her voice remained steady, though her heart thrummed with trepidation. He gestured toward a pair of chairs arranged near a small table, the arrangement intimate but respectful. She sat, hands folded tightly in her lap, while he remained standing as though wrestling with words that resisted shaping. "I have wronged you," he said finally, each syllable deliberate. "At the gala, I watched your humiliation unfold and did nothing. I allowed cowardice to masquerade as restraint. Since then, your name has been torn apart while mine remains untouched." His jaw tightened, a flicker of self-reproach darkening his features. "I ask your forgiveness only so far as you find it tolerable to grant." Eleanor absorbed his confession with quiet stillness. "I do not seek apologies," she murmured. "What occurred cannot be undone by regret." She looked directly at him then, her gaze unwavering. "But I cannot deny that your silence wounded me more deeply than the whispers." He stepped closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance. "I know, and there is more. The rumors that plague you, they did not arise from chance. They were crafted intentionally to wound." Rain intensified against the roof, echoing the gravity of his words. "Your cousin Charlotte targeted you out of envy. She sought my attention and despised that I noticed you instead." Eleanor's breath caught. She had suspected spite, but not motive. "Notice me," she echoed softly, disbelief tinged with sorrow. Sebastian lowered his gaze, searching for composure before continuing. "I recognized you when you entered the gala. Years ago, before my mother passed, you visited her during an illness. She spoke of a young lady with quiet kindness and unfeigned gentleness. You had brought flowers, violets, I believe, and read poetry when she was too weak to hold the book herself." His expression softened with reverent memory. "I never forgot." Warmth and ache curled around Eleanor's heart. She remembered the Duchess clearly, frail, gracious, grateful for company that asked nothing in return. "I never imagined she mentioned me," she whispered. "I was nobody of consequence." To her, "You were balm," he said. "To me, you became a memory I returned to in moments when the world felt unbearably hollow." Silence expanded between them, tender yet trembling. Eleanor clasped her hands to stave off the emotion rising within. "Your Grace, whatever kindness you perceive in me has only brought calamity. My reputation lies in ruins. Every attempt you make to defend me deepens the suspicion that I seek to trap you." He exhaled sharply. "And what if I wish to be caught?" The admission escaped him before restraint could intervene. His eyes widened slightly, as though startled by the force of his own truth. "Forgive the impropriety. I speak not of entrapment in the crude manner others imply, but of choice, my choice, to stand beside you." Eleanor looked away, her vision blurring with unshed tears. "If you continue down this path, you risk your own standing. I cannot bear the thought of damaging the one person who has shown me sincerity." He moved closer still, until she could sense the careful steadiness of his breath. "Miss Whitcomb, your name is the only one I have spoken with certainty in months." The lantern light gilded the edges of his form, enhancing the sincerity etched across his face. "I summon courage poorly, perhaps too late, but I summon it nonetheless." Her composure threatened to fracture. "Your Grace, please, do not say such things. My life has become a battlefield of other people's voices. I cannot endure losing my sense of what is real." He reached out, then stopped himself many inches from her hand, honoring the fragile boundary between them. "Then allow me to offer truth uncontaminated by rumor. You are not alone in this." The words hovered between them, potent and dangerous. She closed her eyes briefly, letting their weight settle into her bones. "If only truth were enough," she whispered. "It is a beginning," he replied. In that moment, the rain softened, as though granting them a fleeting chamber of quiet. Eleanor allowed herself a single breath of belief that perhaps her downfall was not absolute, that perhaps someone saw beyond the shattered appearance of her life. But the conservatory door creaked suddenly, its hinges protesting an uninvited presence. Eleanor stiffened, her pulse leaping. Footsteps echoed across the tile floor, swift and purposeful. Sebastian turned sharply, his expression shifting to guarded alertness. In the archway stood a figure she recognized instantly. Her aunt, face pale with fury, eyes blazing with righteous triumph. Mrs. Hawthorne's voice sliced through the fragile sanctuary like a blade. "So it is true," she hissed. "You meet a duke in secret, in the dead of night. Eleanor, you have doomed us both." And in that instant, Eleanor understood. Whatever truth had been spoken here was now a weapon in someone else's hands. The storm outside had merely been a prelude to the tempest now entering the room. Mrs. Hawthorne's accusation reverberated through the conservatory like a crack of thunder, tearing through the fragile intimacy that had settled moments before. Eleanor rose instinctively, as though standing might slow the collapse of her world. Yet her voice failed her. Sebastian stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the oncoming storm, his expression steadying into a calm that carried the force of command. Rain hammered the glass overhead, echoing the quickened beat of Eleanor's heart as her aunt advanced with righteous indignation. "Eleanor Whitcomb," Mrs. Hawthorne seethed, "I have endured whispers for weeks, but this treachery is unforgivable. Do you understand what you have risked? What you have already cost this household?" Her cheeks burned with outrage, her eyes darting towards Sebastian with wounded pride. "And you, your grace, surely you must recognize the impropriety of summoning a young woman alone in the night. Whatever excuse you offer will only serve to worsen matters." Sebastian inclined his head, his voice low but unwavering. "Madam, I summoned Miss Whitcomb to rectify falsehoods that were crafted to harm her reputation. Nothing improper occurred here." His tone, though respectful, carried the weight of truth spoken without apology. "I would have addressed these matters publicly had I believed it would spare her further distress." Mrs. Hawthorne scoffed, folding her arms with bitter disbelief. "You believe the world will accept such a claim? A duke meeting a disgraced girl in secret? The very suggestion is damning enough." Her voice trembled as months of fear and resentment spilled forth. "She has already shamed us beyond measure. Tell me, your grace, what possible reason could you have for involving yourself further?" Sebastian's jaw tightened. Eleanor felt the air shift around him, as though some long-restrained resolve had awakened. "Because," he said, "the lies were born from jealousy, not truth. Your niece is innocent of every charge cast against her." He glanced at Eleanor then, a fleeting but fiercely protective gesture that set Mrs. Hawthorne bristling. "And because I refuse to allow malice to dictate her fate." Before either woman could respond, a voice echoed from the doorway. Charlotte Hawthorne entered with practiced poise, though a flicker of unease betrayed her composure. She had not intended to witness this confrontation. Her arrival stemmed from curiosity rather than courage. Yet now she stood cornered beneath Sebastian's unyielding scrutiny. I do not see why this must involve me," she stammered, lifting her chin in a futile display of defiance. Sebastian stepped toward her, his expression cutting through her performance. "Miss Hawthorne, the footman you spoke before, the companions you confided in, even the coachman who overheard your boasts, each has confirmed your hand in the defamation of your cousin. Do you deny it?" The lantern light caught the sharp planes of his face, making his question impossible to evade. Charlotte faltered, her breath quickening. "I merely repeated what others whispered. One cannot be blamed for passing along concerns. Surely you, of all people, understand how appearances can be misinterpreted." Her attempt at subtle manipulation dissolved beneath his stare. "You did more than repeat," Sebastian replied quietly. "You crafted. You embellished. You poisoned." His voice softened, yet each word struck with unforgiving precision. "You sought to secure favor by destroying someone else's standing. That is cruelty, Miss Hawthorne, not concern." Mrs. Hawthorne's face blanched as the truth crashed into her like a wave. She turned toward her daughter, disbelief contorting her features. "Charlotte, tell me this is untrue." But the trembling in the girl's hands revealed the answer before her lips could form a denial. With her schemes exposed, Charlotte's composure crumbled, leaving only a faint, miserable whisper of protest. Sebastian lifted his head, addressing both women with solemn clarity. "The time for concealment has ended. I will not watch Miss Whitcomb suffer one moment more for the misdeeds of others." Eleanor felt a swell of emotion, relief, disbelief, gratitude, yet it mingled with dread. "Your Grace," she murmured, stepping beside him, "please be cautious. If you speak too boldly in my defense, society will turn its scrutiny upon you instead. I cannot bear the idea of dragging you into ruin." He turned toward her, his expression softening with a tenderness that threatened to unmoor her entirely. "Eleanor, I have stood silent too long. My inaction has already permitted greater harm than any truth could." His voice dipped, intimate and unwavering. "If your name falls, then mine shall fall beside it. I will not let you stand alone." A gasp escaped Mrs. Hawthorne as the gravity of his vow filled the room. "Your Grace, think carefully," she urged, desperation replacing anger. "A declaration of this kind would bind you to her fate. The tongue will interpret it as an admission of attachment, perhaps even an intention to wed." "So be it," he replied. Eleanor's breath halted. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them, the gentle tremor in her fingers, the steady certainty in his gaze. He reached for her hand, not quite touching, but offering the promise of support she had forgotten how to accept. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, voice resonant with unshakable resolve, "your character is beyond reproach. I will state so publicly, at once, to every gathered guest in my home tonight." Only then did Eleanor realize the conservatory was not the quiet refuge she believed. Through the fog glass panels she heard distant murmurs, footsteps, voices, the audible rustle of startled curiosity. Guests had arrived early for the evening's gathering hosted at the Ravensley estate, and news traveled through servants' halls with the speed of wildfire. A scandal unfolding in the conservatory was far too tantalizing to ignore. Sebastian extended his hand fully now. "Come with me," he said, "and let us end this faucet before the very people who helped sustain it." Eleanor hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling hand in his. The contact sent a quiet shock through her, a fragile surge of hope fighting its way through layers of fear. Together they stepped into the corridor, followed by Mrs. Hawthorne's frantic objections and Charlotte's muffled sobs. As they neared the grand hall, the murmur of voices swelled, and the glow of chandeliers spilled across the floor like liquid gold. Eleanor's pulse raced. The idea of confronting the crowd felt like stepping into fire. Yet Sebastian's presence beside her anchored her trembling resolve. He paused just before entering, turning toward her with an expression that held both apology and promise. "After tonight," he whispered, "your life will no longer be shaped by their cruelty." She drew a breath to steady herself, and as they crossed the threshold, every head turned, waiting, hungry, unaware that the words he was about to speak would alter all their destinies. Ashes still clung to the chandeliers when the first scream tore through the hall, snapping every guest from their stupor. Sebastian felt the sound slice through him like a blade, for he knew the blaze consuming his estate was no accident. His mistake, trusting a man he once called friend, had ignited a fate none of them could outrun. Eleanor, standing at his side, sensed his dread before he spoke. Her gaze swept the smoke-veiled rafters, searching for the threat hiding within the chaos. The fire had begun in the West Wing moments after Sebastian declared Eleanor's innocence before the assembled company. His words had barely settled when a footman burst into the hall, announcing flames devouring the gallery. Panic surged, guests scattered, servants fought to contain the inferno. And somewhere in the uproar, Sebastian saw the silhouette of Lord Veric, the man whose jealousy had fueled the lies that tormented Eleanor for months. "Veric," Sebastian muttered. "His hay." Eleanor followed his gaze, catching the glint of a familiar ring disappearing into the smoke. A whisper of fear curled through her, but she met Sebastian's eyes with resolve. "Then we stop him together." Not long ago, she would have doubted her own voice, cowed by rumors that shadowed her. But tonight had reshaped something within her. The truth spoken aloud, and Charlotte's deception collapsing, had restored a piece of herself she believed lost. Now she stood not as a victim, but as a woman who refused to be erased. Sebastian drew closer. "Stay with the others. I can't risk." "You won't command me into safety," she cut in. "Not when the same man who nearly destroyed me now threatens you." Her defiance lit something warm in him. He took her hand. Then we face him together. They pressed into the smoke, weaving through overturned chairs and fallen draperies. The blaze crackled like a living creature, swallowing tapestries and sending shards of glass raining onto the floor. Eleanor's lungs burned, but she pushed forward, guided by Sebastian's steady pull. Shouting echoed down the corridor. Above it came a chilling laugh. Veric stepped from the shadows, his face lit by the glow behind him. His expression was serene, as though the destruction he orchestrated were an evening's amusement. "Your Grace," Veric drawled, bowing. "A grand figure before your collapsing dynasty." Sebastian moved Eleanor behind him. "You set my home ablaze. You slandered the woman you pretended to admire." "Why?" "Because you took what should have been mine," Veric snarled. "Your title, your influence, her." Eleanor stepped forward. "I looked at you with courtesy, nothing more. You mistook politeness for invitation." Veric's expression twisted. "You ruined me when you humiliated me at the winter ball." "I refused you," she said. "Nothing more." Sebastian's voice darkened. "End this, Veric. No one else must suffer." "They already have," Veric hissed. "By dawn, everyone will know the Duke and his tarnished darling perished together." He reached inside his coat. Sebastian lunged. The struggle erupted with brutal speed, Veric swinging wildly, Sebastian forcing him back, the two men slamming against the railing overlooking the burning gallery. Eleanor froze only a heartbeat before rushing toward them. The railing groaned beneath their weight as Sebastian grappled for the weapon Veric clutched. Smoke thickened. Flames roared upward. "Sebastian!" she cried. Her voice jolted him. Veric used the distraction, driving his elbow into Sebastian's ribs. Pain tore through him. Veric raised a dagger, aiming for Sebastian's throat. Eleanor didn't think. She seized a fallen candelabrum and swung with desperate strength. It struck Veric's arm, sending the dagger skittering across the floor. He screamed and lunged for her. Sebastian moved faster. He slammed Veric backward. The weakened railing splintered beneath the impact. Wood cracked. Flames surged upward like an open maw. Veric teetered on the edge, eyes wide. "You did this to yourself," Sebastian said. Veric's final snarl was swallowed by the fire as he plunged into the inferno below. Silence crashed down, broken only by the roar of flames. Eleanor reached Sebastian, gripping him as though afraid he might vanish. He gathered her into his arms, trembling from the enormity of what nearly happened. "We must get out," she whispered. He nodded, guiding her through collapsing corridors until they burst into the cold night air. The estate burned behind them, a towering pillar of crimson light. Eleanor turned to Sebastian, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. "Your home is gone. Walls can be rebuilt," he murmured, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. "But losing you would have ruined me." Guests gathered on the lawn, watching the inferno consume Ravensleigh. Whispers rose, some in shock, some in awe. Eleanor leaned against Sebastian, exhaustion settling into her bones. "What happens now?" He looked at the burning estate, then at her, as though seeing the future ignite in the ashes. "Now," he said softly, "we shape our destiny from whatever survives this night." For a fleeting moment, they stood in the glow of destruction, bound by fear and something deeper. Eleanor felt the weight of the night pressing upon her, the smoke searing her throat, the distant cries of servants stitching themselves into memory. She glanced at Sebastian, seeing not the Duke's society revered, but a man stripped to his core, flawed and devoted. He cupped her cheek with a reverence that broke her breath. "Eleanor," he whispered, as if her name were the single truth left in a world collapsing around them. She closed her eyes, letting the moment root itself in her heart. The fire roared behind them, yet the world narrowed to his touch and the promise forming between them. She had been abandoned, slandered, nearly broken. But standing here she felt the spark of a future she had never dared to imagine. And then the earth shuddered beneath them.